Ah, Greece. Land of the polished marble temples, inventors of democracy, and a place where the word mythology carries an expiration date of approximately forever. Nestled in the core of this cradle of civilization and philosophical epiphany is a tangled web of stories so intricate, they make your tangled earphones seem refreshingly simple. Tonight, as I lull you into a serene state of historical hypnosis, let's traverse the whispering annals of Greek mythology. And where better to start than at the very beginning. Picture the cosmos as a rather chaotic version of your aunt's knitting basket. The Greeks, in their ever-logical wisdom, decided that the universe began with chaos. Not exactly Hello Kitty chaos, mind you, but rather a dark, swirling nothingness. Let's not get too bogged down. It's about as easy to grasp as holding on to a trout soaked in olive oil. From this profound nothingness emerged Gaia, Earth herself, the original Mother Nature, if you will. She didn't carry a strong whiff of lavender, unfortunately, but she did come with a whole planet's worth of things, like mountains, seas, and an implied disdain for deforestation. Now, if Gaia was sipping ambrosia on a sunny Mediterranean day, fancying her vast terrestrial wardrobe, things were about to get uncomfortably family-oriented. In a less than glamorous twist, Gaia decided the universe needed company. So out of chaos also came Uranus, the sky. And before you roll your eyes at the obvious earth and sky connection, remember, it's mythological poetry, the kind that ensures you never look at a sunny day the same way again. It turns out that matrimonial bliss amidst swirling cosmic dust wasn't as idyllic as you'd think. Gaia and Uranus's celestial union was fruitful yet, let's say, strained. The mythological living arrangements became uncomfortably tight after their offspring started popping up like greasy finger streaks on a smartphone. Said offspring included the Titans, Cyclopes, and those hard to invite to parties, the Hecatoncheires, giant beings with an apparent fondness for exaggerated hand gestures, given they have 100 hands each. A tough crowd for charades night indeed. Uranus wasn't all too pleased with the children he'd fathered, particularly the multi-handed set, and proceeded to lock them away in Tartarus, the cosmic equivalent of an endlessly echoing basement. Gaia, the doting yet disgruntled mother, found this imprisonment utterly unacceptable and became the Sid from Toy Story of the mythological world, setting a plot in motion. Enter Kronos, the youngest Titan, with an appetite for revenge that was sharper than his accompanying scythe. Coaxed by his mother's whispers, Kronos disentangles from the shuffling Olympian toddler train and exacts revenge upon his father, dethroning him with a slice so precise you could almost think Kronos was auditioning for a cooking show that judges both bravery and precise tomato slicing. Heaven knows what they were smoking to dream up such a complicated family dynamic. Thus Kronos takes the skyward throne, becoming the ruler of the universe and poster child for questionable parental dynamics. But as we'll float gently through these tapestry of tales, you'll soon see that the Greeks didn't really do happily ever after, not without a bit of cosmic squabble and familial chaos anyway. The path of gods and titans is impatiently waiting, as their stories are as sleepy and deep as an afternoon nap on a warm Aegean beach. If these stories help you drift off, please subscribe to the channel. It would mean the world to me. And before you fully fade into dreamland, I would love to know where you're listening from and what time it is there. And with that, the wisps of myth bring the curtain down on this first gentle chapter, hinting at the clashing tales of ambition, power, and celestial storytelling that await in the tranquil folds of the chapters to come. In the tranquil glow of olive wood lamps, let us drift gently into the ancient world of Greek myths. Picture a time long ago where gods dined on ambrosia and engaged in eternal squabbles like a family unsure of who's in charge of the holiday dinner. And in this mythic tapestry, we find ourselves on Mount Olympus, a place more chaotic than a toddler's birthday party at an unsupervised petting zoo. Now, please meet Hera, queen of the gods, whose illustrious title came with a side of divine impatience and a knack for revenge that would make even the best soap opera writers jealous. Hera was married to Zeus, a god whose eye for beauty was matched only by his inability to remember Hera's birthday. In their Olympian palace, Zeus spent his days entertaining himself with too many haphazardly positioned statues. Just imagine the awe-inspiring decor choices and suspiciously long business trips. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Today's tale sprinkles a little history with an ode to the constellations, treating us to the story of Callisto, once a lovely Arcadian nymph and beloved hunting companion of the goddess Artemis. Delightfully, as Greek myths are wont to do, our story opens with Callisto traversing meadows and woodlands, heart set on hunting adventures, blissfully ignorant of the divine melodrama awaiting her. Callisto had a knack for archery, a skill she honed under the watchful eye of Artemis. The two had a relationship as steadfast as a Wi-Fi signal during a thunderstorm. And while Callisto's prowess with a bow was commendable, it was her beauty that caught the eye of Zeus. Ever a fan of amorous pursuits, Zeus devised one of his more unconvincing plans. Instead of using the front door, he transformed himself into Artemis, because what could go wrong with pretending to be your wife's protege, to get a little closer to our unsuspecting nymph. Cue the ominous harmony of harps. Callisto fell for Zeus's ruse, because clearly transformation is easier than truth-telling when you're the king of the gods. And from their meeting was born Arcas. Alas, the plot thickens. Hera, ever the diligent detective and equipped with a divinely suspicious mind, uncovered Zeus's escapades. In a jealous fury that could outshine 1,000 suns, Hera transformed Callisto into a bear, not exactly what you'd hope for when aiming for New Year, New Me. Yet Callisto's story didn't end there. An ordinary bear she was not. With her son Arcas growing up as an avid hunter, what followed was a classic case of mistaken identity on a hunting trip. Imagine the poetic tragedy, a bear encountering her own offspring in the woods, who because of Wheatfield's explanations overheard from his grumpy uncle, mistakenly aimed his spear her way. Now, if you've wondered whether the gods ever did anything responsible, here's your chance. Zeus, perhaps showing a rare flare of paternal guilt or a hint of family-saving grace, intervened at the last moment. He whisked Callisto and Arcas into the night sky to save them from what could have been a moment straight from Homer's epics. Transformed into Ursa Major and Ursa Minor, the Great Bear and the Little Bear, they became part of the constellation family, where they continue to turn and twinkle, offering reassurance to navigators and dreamers alike. And so, as celestial wanderers, Callisto and Arcas remind us that family squabbles are universal, and that maybe occasionally they require some divine intervention, whether through a sprinkle of stardust or the cosmic amusement of gods warming their hands by the glow of celestial mischief. Greek myths weave through time to remind us that life, much like sleep, is a journey to be savored. As we leave the bears to their eternal pirouette across the sky, let's pull our blankets a little tighter, imagine the shimmer of stars above, and prepare to wander further into the mythic realms with the tale that awaits just over the next horizon. In this chapter of our mythically sprawling escapade, we drift through the not-so-well-worn, though humorously tangled tapestry of one unexpected Greek hero, Sisyphus. Considered the world's preeminent expert in the field of proverbial rocks and hard places, Sisyphus was a king famed for his trickery and craftiness. He was, arguably, the founder of a very ancient form of toxic optimism, always believing he'd get away with it, whatever it happened to be that day. Sisyphus, king of Ephyra, which we now know as Corinth, had a fondness for violating the rules set by Olympian gods. Some people skydive for thrills. Sisyphus decided to try cheating death himself. On one fateful occasion, he bound Thanatos, the harbinger of death, with chains, amusingly resulting in a zombie-free era where mortal injuries were merely inconvenient. War and murder became spectator sports, everyone limping around, and Hades' underworld found itself unbelievably empty and echoing with disappointment. Of course, this semi-immortality ran into some red tape with the Cosmos HR department. Infuriated, Zeus himself eventually intervened, putting Thanatos back in business. But this oversight from above spirited away a fact singularly unfortunate for Sisyphus. Death could now reclaim him any number of times it saw fit. And so, Sisyphus died, or more accurately, tried to. Familiar with celestial bylaws like the back of his mythological hand, he issued a curious code, instructing his wife to throw his body into the cross streets, essentially rendering poor Persephone, queen of the underworld, aghast at the sight of her dominion's least regal arrival. Not known for missing opportunities to extort divine sympathy, Sisyphus seized this chance to secure a temporary hall pass back to the land of the living. "I'll just pop back up for a moment to sort this out," he suavely suggested to Persephone, probably with an enigmatic wink. Spoiler: Sisyphus, master of non-attendance of course, overstayed his leave of absence. But in a world where gods are easily insulted and less inclined to enjoy quaint jests, his actions didn't suit so well with the Olympian mood board. His day of reckoning was not long postponed, as he was eventually discovered and summoned to face the judgment panel of divine irritation. The punishment devised was less retributive and more an allegory, cleverly knitting existential absurdity into the fabric of what should have been a neat bit of mythological justice. Sisyphus found himself consigned to Hades, condemned forever to push a prodigious boulder up an unrelenting hill, only to behold the haughty stone tumble back down each time it reached the summit. Like Monday mornings, this dance of utter futility repeated itself endlessly. It seems even the gods appreciated the treacherous whims of irony. As the nightly stars overlooked and ancient winds sang tunes older than time itself, what was meant to be Sisyphus's punishment evolved into a perplexing celebration of persistence. However, in between his Herculean vexations, he developed a covert, obscure admiration for the absurd novelty of his predicament. For you see, the absurdity instilled an imperceptible sense of amusement, like discovering your left sock hidden in plain sight on the right foot. Thus, while you might interpret this story as an eerie bedtime reminder of both rebellion and its consequences, one might also cherish the lighter, less grim lesson. Find humor even when faced with a large rock and an inhospitable hill. It doesn't get more boringly heroic than that. So, as the tale of Sisyphus and his Sisyphean endeavors rolls to its transient end like the rock itself, we find ourselves drifting further into the interwoven myths of more gods, demigods, and entirely too bold mortals. The gentle pull of these stories promises more whimsical tour guides, waiting to accompany us through this mythological slumber, in a world far removed from modern chaos, nestled beyond the horizon and a good ways past the "don't swim here, monsters live in these waters" sign, lay ancient Greece, where gods and mortals played hide and seek with destiny. Despite their celestial might, the deities were not immune to the family politics we all know too well. Yes, it's an age-old story of he said, she said, and Zeus said. Well, it's complicated. To unwind this epic tapestry, let us first embrace the soothing symphony of domestic discord as we tiptoe to Mount Olympus. There, nestled in fluffy clouds that make your pillow jealous, sat the king himself, Zeus, a thunderous personality with a penchant for dramatic entrances. One could say his catchphrase was, "It's Zeus, or it's goose, because I shapeshift too." Oh yes, nothing screamed divine intervention quite like a thunderbolt-wielding supreme being, occasionally masquerading as a swan. The daily happenings on Olympus were rather like a celestial soap opera. Hera, his wife and queen, possessed unmatched determination, chasing Zeus with suspicions hotter than the molten core of Gaia herself. She kept an immaculate record of Zeus's disguise adventures, using a method that could only be described as divine spreadsheeting. If only she had discovered Excel. Meanwhile, down in the rich soil of Hestia's hearth, the goddess of home and hearth juggled her duties of family warmth with the skill of an Olympian gymnast. Meanwhile, she constantly emanated an aura of calmness that even put ambrosial-infused chamomile tea to shame. Hestia rarely participated in the boisterous debates of Olympus. Instead, she chose to make a mean loaf of bread, the aroma of which could persuade even Ares, the god of war, to declare a truce. Did you ever hear of a battlefield conquered by the comforting smell of freshly baked goods? Neither had Ares until then. While these familial skirmishes unfolded amongst the clouds, in the rustling olive groves below, the world of mortals met its own seedy challenges. Here, grapes turned to wine, as one does when faced with uncertainty, and arachnids spun webs with more ambition than the average tech startup. Yet no mortal match could ever eclipse the love story of Orpheus and Eurydice. Orpheus, whose voice could soothe angry sea storms and grumpy toddlers alike, lost his beloved Eurydice to a sly serpent no bigger than a rogue shoelace. From that moment on, even the chirping birds offered a sympathetic silence whenever Orpheus strummed his lyre. But fear not, dear listener, as the inevitable journey to the underworld, Hades, often misunderstood as a villainous realm, was more of a gloomy getaway for introverts. Cerberus, the three-headed canine concierge, no foe to unannounced visitors, checked everyone's reservations at the River Styx's front desk. There, Orpheus's heartfelt melody became a day pass to negotiate the return of his love, a tale retold with crescendos that could lull gods and ghosts alike into peaceful slumber. It was these myths, woven into the tapestry of time, that those bright Greeks whispered to each other under the opalescent glow of their skies. Their stories lived on as lullabies of wisdom and whimsy, gentle reminders that even the most sacred mountaintops have room for laughter and learning. With your mind drifting through these mythical musings, feel the warmth of Hestia's hearth, drawing you closer to dreams, where olive groves whisper secrets of old and the gentle ocean waves applaud the gods' tireless antics. Do let the nightly world of legendary lore carry you onward as the next tale of ancient Greece beckons, inching you ever closer to the embrace of sleep and dreams. As the gentle rustle of olive trees whispers sweet serenades under the Aegean moonlight, we drift into a realm where myth and history intertwine like vines on a very old, possibly tipsy, trellis. Settling in comfortably, we find ourselves contemplating one of the most intriguing tales from the Greek mythological tapestry, the story of Orpheus and Eurydice. Prepare your pillows, dear listener, as we meander through this legendary romance that's been recited more times than an overachieving ancient bard at open mic night. Orpheus, whose name suggests he was either destined for greatness or destined to be remembered by Scrabble enthusiasts, was no ordinary mortal. He was a musician who could serenade even the grumpiest of weathered gods into utter tranquility. Known far and wide for his lyre playing, because if you could play an instrument that resembled a harp crossed with a cheese grater, you'd be famous too. His music was said to charm birds, animals, and as far as rumors have it, even stones, which might explain why the hills were alive with the sound of music, and also suspiciously devoid of rocks. This legendary crooner found the love of his life in the nymph Eurydice. Their romance was like a timeless ballad, played soft and slow under an endless sky of twinkling, celestial disco balls. But as all Greek tales tend to lean towards the not-so-happily ever-after narrative, a tragic plot twist soon emerged, like spotting a minotaur at a labyrinth-themed dinner party. While frolicking, as one does, through the sun-dappled meadows of Arcadia, Eurydice was bitten by a particularly vindictive snake, and quite inconveniently, descended into the shadowy halls of Hades. Orpheus, strumming a melancholy tune on his lyre, was determined to recover her, and with a heart full of courage, and likely a pocketful of symbolic olives, journeyed to the underworld. Because in Greek mythology, hell hath no fury like a musician on a mission. The underworld, managed by Hades, was no Club Med. It was a place of eternal gloom where spirits languished like they were trapped in the world's longest penalty shootout. But Orpheus, with melodies that wafted like a warm, soothing breeze, enchanted everyone, convincing even the stoic ferryman Charon to ferry him across the river Styx without demanding extra verification on the guest list. Before long, Orpheus stood before Hades and his equally regal wife, Persephone. Imagine an X Factor audition, judged by the goth royalty of antiquity. Orpheus struck his lyre and sang with such pathos that tears flowed like vintage Merlot from the eyes of the underworld's residents. Even Hades, whose very job was to keep the dead, was moved beyond mere mortal comprehension or extra parking voucher permits. The sovereign of shadows agreed to release Eurydice, but with one crucial condition. Orpheus must not look back until both had returned to the world above. It seemed simple enough, a task more straightforward than avoiding eye contact with a Gorgon while trying to preserve one's social standing. As Orpheus ascended the dim, spiraling path, with Eurydice trailing behind him like the fragrant breeze of a divine bakery, doubt crept in. The sound of her footsteps faded, planting a seed of uncertainty. Was she truly behind him? Or had the gods played a trick to keep things exciting for once? With mere steps to go before reaching daylight, Orpheus, unable to resist any longer, turned around. There she was, Eurydice, with her cherubic presence. But his yearning glance severed the promise, sending her vanishing back into the underworld faster than you could say. Forever, optimistic troubadour. Saddened beyond measure, Orpheus wandered the earth, plucking his lyre to melodies that now echoed the sweet, sorrowful loss he faced. But his legacy endured, hinted at in every heartfelt ballad and late-night serenade, proving that love, though fleeting, can be timeless. As the melody of the ancient lyre fades into the dreamy stillness, we are reminded of how tales of love and challenge enrich our dreams. So let the strains of history's musings lull you into sleep as we pause to gather our thoughts, preparing for yet another tale where mythology meets the warm embrace of slumber. In the land of myths and legends, where gods frolicked merrily among mortals, there were tales so intoxicatingly mundane, they could very well lull a minotaur to sleep. Here, nestled comfortably between things that don't quite matter, is our tale of Poseidon and his peculiarly relentless battle with, get this, a single island. Yes, the god of the sea, rider of waves, shaker of lands, was deep in a long-standing quarrel with the island of Naxos. It's the kind of juicy conflict that makes Olympic squabbles seem like friendly dinner debates. Now you've got to understand, Poseidon had a bit of a reputation, known for creating furious storms and not reading the room when it came to maritime etiquette. He wasn't exactly the ideal neighbor in the Mediterranean. The only thing more tempestuous than his temperament was arguably his beard, constantly tangled by his masterpiece whirlpools. And so, the sea god found himself eyeing Naxos, whose only crime was being perfectly sandy and delightfully breezy. The people of Naxos, blissfully unaware of their looming watery predicament, went about their days crafting fine wines and other equally noble pursuits like lounging. You might say, Naxos was the perfected art of doing absolutely nothing spectacular, which naturally irked Poseidon to no end. In a fit of divine annoyance, Poseidon tried unleashing his mightiest waves upon its shores, believing this would dislodge the insolent landmass from its comfortable place in his domain. But much to his ever-growing disdain, the island barely quivered. It was as if it possessed a soothing resilience, or perhaps just sheer laziness, that deflected the watery fury like a well-aged mythological wine, robust with the flavors of not today and try again later. Undeterred by nature's indifference, Poseidon assembled a council of sea creatures, perhaps the strangest board meeting in the history of the ocean. In attendance were the usual suspects: dolphins who doubled as underwater jesters, particularly chatty crustaceans, and a few deep-sea mollusks known for their budget-friendly advice. Tragically, the council only succeeded in forming one coherent plan: to hold a yearly mollusk festival, which, needless to say, solved absolutely nothing regarding Poseidon's predicament with Naxos. Meanwhile, on the island, life continued at a snail's pace, literally, as local snails took their time navigating everything from leaves to rocks. This unbothered existence only heightened Poseidon's determination. Using the divine artistry he's renowned for, he sculpted a trident of such monumental intimidation that passing clouds paused to peek at the craftsmanship. Yet, wielding it proved somewhat cumbersome due to an unexpected oversight. Tridents, it so happens, aren't very aerodynamic. In the end, tired and perhaps a tad embarrassed by his conspicuous aquatic tantrums, Poseidon eventually reconciled with the obstinate island. Legends say he gifted it the ability to produce grapes that made mortals weep with joy, or possibly boredom, depending on who you ask. The islanders toasted to their mysterious omen opponent with what can only be described as the world's first hangovers, a fitting tribute that left Poseidon both amused and slightly queasy. A rare ailment amongst gods, but well known to mortals across millennia. Thus, Poseidon's grudge with Naxos evolved into a bemusing memory, told by the light of moonlit waves as they whispered to sleepy children of a peculiar god, whose magnificence now kept time with the lazy, unhurried lifestyle of an island that simply refused to change. As the celestial orbit drew another day sluggishly to a close, the narrative waves washed us ashore to the fascinating tidiness of yet another mythic ripple, patiently waiting for its own turn to dream. In the hazy twilight of ancient Greece, as the fields slumbered under a blanket of starlit dreams, a most peculiar tale unfolded. A tale of someone who could put anyone to sleep, anytime, anywhere. Ironically, no, it wasn't Hypnos, the god of sleep himself, but rather a certain Orpheus with a reputation for melodies that could mellow a marathoner mid-stride. Picture Orpheus, the son of a muse and a man with a penchant for harps. It's unclear whether his musical talent emerged naturally or was the celestial equivalent of Santa dropping off a guitar for Christmas. Either way, Orpheus's lyrical prowess was unmatched. Trees swayed, not just because of the wind, but because they knew there was no point in arguing with an artist on a roll. Now, somewhere amidst these harmonious happenings, the gods above must have been wondering whether Orpheus had some divine cheat codes, because this mortal's tunes could soothe even the irritable Ares, god of war, whose usual temperament was much like an espresso without the foam. It was only logical that this musical maestro would end up attracting love, albeit with a twist only Greek mythology could handle. Enter Eurydice, a wood nymph, or as the locals called her, the one who dances like nobody's watching. Orpheus was captivated by her grace, and when struck by her beauty, he sang a melody so sweet that even Hera paused her eternal bickering to wipe a tear and say, "Bless." The twist, however, came rather abruptly, like a cat knocking over a valuable vase. During one of her woodland promenades, Eurydice stepped on a snake, an occupational hazard for those forever frolicking through fields barefoot. The snake, living up to its contractual obligation of startling poor wood nymphs, bit her. Tragedy speed-dialed its friends, and before long, Eurydice found herself in the underworld, Orpheus, stricken by grief, to the point where not even a heavy metal concert could lift his spirits, decided to do what any lover would dream of but few would execute: venture into Hades to retrieve his beloved. The trajectory of Orpheus's journey resembled that of any courageous hero, with all the Ain classic ingredients: a fearless spirit, some celestial persuasion, and an unhealthy disregard for personal safety. Upon arrival at the gates of the underworld, he faced Cerberus, the three-headed dog who typically dined on trespassers. Orpheus, not one to waste an audience, played a lullaby so hypnotic that Cerberus, or, as Orpheus might quip, 3 wolves to none, promptly found himself in doggy dreamland, undoubtedly chasing spectral squirrels. When Orpheus finally met Hades and Persephone, he was struck by how similar they were to a year-round Halloween party thrower and his full-loving wife. In fact, Hades was so amenable to Orpheus's melody that he considered adding soothing Elysian sounds to his personal playlist. There was, however, a catch: the ultimate no-peeking rule. Orpheus could lead Eurydice back to the living world, but if he looked back at her before they both reached the surface, she would remain in the underworld forever. And so, they ascended. With each note, Orpheus sculpted an ethereal path through the cavernous realms, while Eurydice followed in silence, her footsteps as soft as a whispering breeze. But as with all suspenseful acts, a genre not exclusive to thrillers, but equally shared by myths, Orpheus's impatience slowly unraveled. Just as daylight cracked its welcome above like a sleepy yawn readying for morning, Orpheus, swept by overwhelming affection, turned back to glimpse Eurydice's face. The moment was both poignant and heartbreaking, not unlike realizing you've pronounced gyro wrong your whole life. And thus, Orpheus, the man whose music could melt hearts and harden resolves, sung perhaps the saddest dirge known to myth, the echoes of which still linger, or so the breezes would have you believe, in crevices and corners of the world. There's a hum, a quiet lull in the realm, a bridge of stories yet to be told, waiting patiently, much like the stars eager to twinkle into life. Relaxing now in this narrative, six quilt as the mythic world prepares for its next scene. In a quaint corner of the Greek mythological tapestry, nestled between tales of dashing heroes and formidable gods, lies the story of a man named Sisyphus. Now, dear listener, you might ask yourself, what could lull you into slumber about the tale of a man eternally punished to roll a rock uphill, only to have it tumble down each time? Ah, but therein lies the charm of Greek myths. If nothing else, they're an ongoing exercise in absurdity. Sisyphus, the crafty king of Corinth, was renowned not for his bravery or valor, but for his uncanny ability to trick. You see, he wasn't merely your average ruler. Sisyphus liked to think of himself as a connoisseur of cunning. His mischief began long before his notorious punishment, and it seems the gods developed a certain fondness, disguised as exasperation, for his persistent meddling. Once upon an early Greek morning, Sisyphus found himself in a bit of a pickle with Thanatos, the embodiment of death. Thanatos, who preferred tasks quick and life-ending, had come to escort Sisyphus to the afterlife. Sisyphus, however, wasn't quite ready to bid farewell to his earthly shenanigans. In a display of cheeky ingenuity that only the Greeks could appreciate, he managed to outwit Thanatos by securing him in chains. Yes, Sisyphus had done the impossible. He had trapped death itself. For a brief period, life was beautiful, notably because nobody could die. Apollos harped, parties never ended, and mortals began to wonder, is immortality where the grapes come from? However, as you might imagine, this arrangement did not sit well with the gods. Ares, the god of war, became particularly miffed as his glorious battles turned into protracted staring contests owing to the whole inability to die situation. So, with irritation and possibly a lot of celestial paperwork on his desk, Ares liberated Thanatos and, in his manner, restored the balance of life and death. But Sisyphus, likely with a mischievous twinkle in his eye, had a few more tricks tucked into his toga before departing for the underworld. Convinced his wife wouldn't give him the proper farewell rites, Sisyphus persuaded Hades, no less, to let him go back to the surface to chastise her. Of course, once restored to the realm of sunlit mortals, Sisyphus had no intention of returning to the underworld. His return was delayed indefinitely, causing much divine eyebrow-raising on Mount Olympus. Surely Zeus had rolled his eyes to the heavens, wondering if this was going to become a quarterly event. Eventually, after much bureaucratic celestial persuasion, and no doubt several memos from Hera reminding Zeus about things left to do, Sisyphus was indeed shepherded back to the underworld. This time, however, they had fashioned a rather unique job for him. Some might call it punitive monotony, but you'll appreciate it as a lucrative exercise program, rolling a massive boulder uphill, only to have it perpetually roll back down. It's easy to imagine that as Sisyphus began his Sisyphean task, a whispered, "Worth it," may have slipped from his lips. Interestingly enough, the story of Sisyphus lends its name to the term Sisyphean. referring to futile endeavors that never reap reward. It's a phrase I offer you if you ever feel your chores are never-ending or your inbox is eternally refilling. So next time you're engaged in an endlessly repetitive task, remember, you're in mythical company. As the moon casts its tranquil spell, you'll find that even Sisyphus has his place, elusive yet certain on this sleepy, epic journey we're undertaking. It's a reminder that stories, like dreams, loop back upon themselves in the most fascinating of ways. Somewhere in the chasm of ancient echoes, Sisyphus and his boulder continue to charm, endlessly engaging the wonder of what could have been and what may never be again. And now, dear listener, as you drift further into the warm embrace of sleep, prepare to step with us beyond this chapter, deeper into the mythic realms of possibility and gods who might just have a funny bone of their own. In the realm of the impossibly ancient, where olive trees whispered secrets to the winds and city-states were just getting a taste for democracy, or was it utter chaos? There existed a tale about a peculiar fellow named Tiresias. Now, Tiresias had an extraordinarily colorful life, the kind filled with more twists and turns than one of those windy, pebble-strewn, barely marked Greek roads. Our tale, dear listener, finds Tiresias at a crossroads, both literally and metaphorically. He was just minding his own business when fate, with a mischievous wink, decided to spice things up. As Tiresias meandered through the sun-drenched plains of ancient Greece, he stumbled upon an incident involving two sacred snakes having a lively disagreement. As any rational person would, Tiresias intervened with a strategic twack of his, or a walking stick, a decision that, in retrospect, was less than wise. Fate, not one to let an opportunity slip, transformed him into a woman for 7 years. And so began the most puzzling episode of Tiresias's storied life, a peculiar, gender-bending escapade in ancient Greece. Let's not underestimate the cunning and witty Tiresias. During those 7 years, he accumulated rather a treasure trove of insights about the human condition. Experience being the best teacher, they say, especially when you get to view life from more perspectives than Marsyas had strings on his lyre. Eventually, he chanced upon the same snakes, deciding this time for an encore performance. This bold choice swung the pendulum back, restoring his original masculine form and thus setting the stage for a fateful encounter with the gods themselves. But this was no run-of-the-mill divine interaction over olive oil markets or sacrificial cow quality. No, it was more of a celestial debate about which gender, the masculine or feminine, enjoyed a richer experience in matters of the heart. Zeus, the lord of the sky and serial risk-taker, stood in one corner, while Hera, his ever-vigilant wife, stood defiantly in the other. Naturally, the matrimonial duo turned to Tiresias. Who else would be more qualified to arbitrate this loaded question? Tiresias, by then well-versed in the art of diplomacy, because Greek myths do love a bit of dramatic tension, gave a response that neither Hera nor Zeus found particularly edifying. He wisely, or unwisely, depending on whom you ask, declared that women, hands down, had the better deal, earning him a swift yet blinding flash of anger from Hera, which paradoxically rendered him sightless forevermore. Zeus, in a rare bout of divine fairness, or maybe just feeling a bit guilty, compensated Tiresias with the gift of prophecy, plus a healthy extension on life's subscription. With his newfound oracular talent, Tiresias set up shop in Thebes, a city then immersed in increasingly bizarre mythological dilemmas. From advising Oedipus on his questionable familial choices to counseling Odysseus on his meandering journey home, Tiresias's reputation soared far and wide. Yet, beneath his legendary status lay an ironic truth. His own life's labyrinth of transformations and trials carried a subtle reminder that not even the wisest could entirely unravel the complexities of fate. As we let the gentle night drape more comfortably over Tiresias's tales, remember that even the most perplexing discussions about heart matters often lead to more questions than answers, especially when mediated by gods known for creating more problems than they solve. Still, as Tiresias discovered, sometimes the journey itself, however serpent-riddled, perspective-changing or brief, is where life's quieter secrets reside, waiting to guide unsuspecting travelers. And now, as the stars twinkle softly over our ancient narrative, we find ourselves at a soothing juncture, ready to float serenely into the next chapter of this intricate mythological landscape, a place where wisdom dances delicately between what is seen and unseen. Let your thoughts drift gently into the night, as if on soft Phaeacian waves, as our Greek journey whispers its way onward through nuanced shadows. Once upon a not-so-restful Greek night, snuggled comfortably between the ominous shadows of mythical mountains and the cradle of a rather cantankerous Mediterranean sea, we find ourselves sailing with the persuasive, yet perpetually misdirected hero, Odysseus. Our charming wayfarer was convinced it was possible to outwit the gods, but like a toddler trying to sneak a cookie without making a sound, the attempt was as audacious as it was doomed. Caught in what could only be described as an ancient version of a GPS malfunction, thanks in large part to a less than reliable device named Poseidon, god of earthquakes, storms and maritime rage issues, Odysseus and his shipmates embarked on what turned out to be the most elaborate tour of the Greek mythological realm. One version of Odysseus's saga tells of his encounter with the enchanting Circe. Circe, the original hostess with the mostess, known for throwing legendary feasts that could shame modern brunch spreads. Her island was lush and inviting, with whispers of an eternal Sunday morning feel, crafted from the lazy loveliness of her charms and, quite literally, magic. Of course, for Odysseus and his crew of weary mariners, it seemed the perfect place to rest their salt-crusted souls, if only they could have resisted the urge to sample Circe's generous menu. Alas, one swig from her deliciously enchanted wine and poof, pigs they became. Talk about hogging all the hospitality. But Odysseus, clever even while continentally challenged, managed to avoid swilling her special vintage, armed only with the advice of Hermes, our trusty messenger god, who handed over a floral antidote, a magical haberdashery, you might say, allowing our hero to withstand Circe's porcine persuasion. Needless to say, he then managed to charm Circe in much a different manner, negotiating terms and securing his crew's transformation back to their slightly less adorable human selves. And so, before long, they were back to sailing, albeit down a significantly more complicated route than originally anticipated. Their adventure continued with a particularly ominous assignment. Odysseus was to navigate the underworld. It seems there's always some curious connection between heroes and underworlds, isn't there? As if the world above wasn't challenging enough. In the deepest realms of Hades, our veteran mariner sought wisdom from the spirits of the departed. There he encountered Tiresias, the blind prophet, who graciously imparted not only wisdom, but also a long list of naval regulations, ethical considerations, and the latest underworld tourist traps, lest Odysseus forget there's always a list involved when dealing with mythical voyages. Surrounded by the phantom whispers of souls gone by, one would imagine Odysseus had enough of tempting fate and mythic interference. Yet superheroes of bygone civilizations seldom did heed a good warning. Perhaps he thought of it as an epic finale, though if you asked his crew, it was more akin to a never-ending set of curtain calls, each accompanied by yet another godly vendetta or fantastical foe from some ancient Grievon smorgasbord. As the ethereal, gentle breezes of the Aegean tickled his most daring dreams, this vast maze of adventures slowly untangled itself, not unlike a particularly knotted ball of yarn in the hands of Athena, goddess of strategy and craft. Such was the life of Odysseus, a protagonist capable of leading his human head through caverns of chaos, tempestuous waves, and the tender illusions woven through the fabled fabric of Greek storytelling. May the waters soften, wax and wane, as these echoes of the classical Odyssey crest into the sleepy embrace of history. With the winds all but stilled, our poised storyteller ships you softly toward the horizon of another Grecian dream. Close, Now your eyes, for even in this storied landscape, another awaits, one led perhaps by the wisdom of the divine and mischief, no doubt of fate. Ah, dear listener, let your mind wander to the gentle lull of ancient breezes where the olive trees sway in whispered secrets. As the moon hangs like a celestial lyre in the sky, we delve into our tale, gently unraveling the threads of Greek mythos with the comforting ease of untangling a well-loved, albeit mildly tangled toga. Tonight, we voyage with the god of merriment himself, a character as spirited as a vintage wine, which is fitting because it's precisely wine this deity has a penchant for. Dionysus, the grape-loving, vine-adoring, party-favouring god who could convert a humdrum vine to a festival extravaganza with just a touch. While some might see a vineyard, Dionysus saw a divine disco, grapes swaying like the partners in a cosmic dance. Born from quite the dramatic backstory involving an ill-fated mortal named Semele and a phenomenally complex divine birthing scenario, because simple births weren't stylish in Greek mythos. Dionysus had his early life intricacies. Young and sprightly, he was entrusted to Hermes, the Hermes post-birth delivery service, to be discreetly reared by a band of merry mountain nymphs known as the Hyades. You know, because who wouldn't trust a gaggle of giggling ladies of the forest with childcare? Our wine connoisseur deity didn't just associate with grapes and vines. His processions were legendary, a cavalcade of ecstasy, with satyrs and maenads, whose energy levels suggest they had breakfast cereal before it was even invented, flooding the countryside with revelry. Imagine if a modern music festival met the nobility of a cocktail soiree, and you've got yourself a Dionysian parade. On one notable occasion, dear Dionysus decided to tour the seven seas, quite literally for a change of pace. He happened across a band of pirates, a jovial group who, despite their seafaring bravado, made the fatal mistake of assuming this lone traveler would be easy to ransom. Even in ancient Greece, however, first impressions could be deceiving. They tied him up snugly on their ship, unaware they had essentially bid farewell to normal maritime rules. As Dionysus gazed about him with serene hilarity, the pirates were astonished to see their ropes slip through nonchalantly, as though they were as ineffective as buttered yarn. Almost immediately, the ship blossomed into a jungle of vines, and the air was rich with the sweet, intoxicating scent of grapes. It stopped being a vessel and started being an impromptu vineyard. The sea, always partial to a good charade, began echoing with the joyful braying of Dionysus' favourite animal, the satyr's chortling stand-in, the donkey. Panic-stricken men dived overboard, fleeing this botanical rebellion. Dionysus, in an act of divine clemency, turned them into dolphins, presumably so they could perpetually frolic in the waves and remember not to anger jovial gods from thenceforth. One pirate, who had been particularly thoughtful, if slightly forgetful, with securing knots, was granted the ability to stay human, undoubtedly grateful not to trade the land for a dolphin's slick scales. Ah, the gentle power of Dionysus' laughter, somehow taming chaos into harmony. With adventures aplenty, this was but one in a string of entertaining episodes where Dionysus danced across the wine-dark sea of storytelling. Delight in knowing he brought more than just wine to hordes of admirers. He brought tales, the antidote to life's solemnity, reminding mortals of the joy in unraveling a tale, a grape cluster, or the complexities of an intriguing if highly implausible myth. As the stars continue to twinkle a sleepy lullaby over Greece's landscape, imagine Dionysus leaning back with satisfaction, a grape in hand, nodding off as the first rays of dawn begin their gentle caress of the horizon. And so, as the echoes of ancient revelries drift quietly into the realms of dreams, they invite you to stay in this gentle reverie as we eventually meet another famed inhabitant of Mount Olympus in the chapters to come, while your very own dreamscapes unfurl softly, one soothing page at a time. In the moonlit waters of ancient Greece, we meet our next character who epitomizes the magnificence and chaos of the sea, Poseidon. Picture, if you will, a tempestuous ocean frolicking in the sunlight as shadows cast playful shapes beneath the waves. Now imagine a majestic figure cutting through the surf with seaweed for a crown and a trident wielded like a conductor in an orchestra of waves. Yes, that's Poseidon, god of the sea, earthquakes, and horses. The true Renaissance man of mythology, if ever there was one. Poseidon, it must be said, had a flair for drama. Known for his unpredictable mood swings, his temperament could shift quicker than a fish could dart. On a good day, the seas were calm, a mirror reflecting the cerulean sky. But woe betide anyone who wished for a cup of calm on a day when Poseidon's coffee had gone cold. That was when the seas mirrored something out of a Jaws movie. Let us drift gently back to a typical day in Poseidon's aquatic realm. The dolphins, master jesters of the ocean, play tag under the watchful eye of their sovereign, while sirens hum ethereal melodies designed to enchant sailors, only leading them slightly off course. Because let's face it, even sirens need a rest. Poseidon himself sits atop his throne of coral and pearls, presiding over his watery kingdom with an imposing majesty slightly marred by the occasional surprised hiccup from a resident octopus. Yet, beneath this aquatic serenity lay a fierce family rival. For even in the world of gods, sibling rivalry was as unavoidable as the tides. Poseidon and his brothers, Hades and Zeus, were never short of dramatic sibling banter. While Zeus held court atop Mount Olympus, tending to skies and thunderbolts like a celestial weatherman prone to over-exaggeration, and Hades retreated to his somber underworld kingdom, a bit like being drawn to the compulsion to watch sad movies, Poseidon ruled the seas with an iron, or perhaps coral-infused hand. But Poseidon's tumultuous heart often hankered for more than just the rolling sea. His role as god of horses offered a solid terrestrial escape, 1 foot on dry land. Inspired by seashells' curves, or perhaps the wind-sculpted mane of a wave, Poseidon was credited with creating the horse from the sea foam, a fact still hotly debated in equestrian circles today. A tempest of crashing waves and a furious neigh accompanied their birth, leaving mere mortals below, scrambling to their local IKEA for flood insurance. At times, Poseidon's stories unraveled delusions that even in the divine world, things could go hilariously amiss. Take, for instance, the time Athena, quite the artful negotiator when it came to olive trees, bested him in a contest for the patronage of Athens. Offering a bountiful well of saltwater wasn't exactly the crowd-pleaser Poseidon anticipated. However, Athena's olive trees swayed gracefully in her favor, leaving our sea god with much to ponder over in his endless blue realm. Yet Poseidon, being Poseidon, took his defeat in stride, perhaps vowing to upgrade his presentations for the next TED Talk on ancient island franchise opportunities. As evening tides whispered, we find Poseidon walking the thin line between benevolent father of the sea and grumbling oceanic ruler. His myriad of offspring, ranging from cyclopes to mortal heroes, often left his family tree resembling a hydra, convoluted and flourishing. While familial relations may have added wrinkles to Poseidon's otherwise godly visage, which, being Greek, was somehow perpetually youthful, it enriched the mythic seabed from which countless tales emerged. And so, as waves lapped softly against the craggier cliffs of various mythologies, Poseidon, like all legendary figures, harbored dreams and desires as deep as the Aegean itself. Quietly watching over his realm with a sense of unearthly wisdom, tempered by centuries of sea breeze, he remains a true fixture in the celestial calendar of chaos and calm. Let the tides of time carry us gently into the twilight of our tale, as the tales of other gods await their turn in the spotlight, under the silvery moonlight of the timeless Grecian skies. As we drift into the gentle rhythms of the ancient world, imagine sailing on the tranquil Aegean Sea, where the Greek mythological adventures often unfolded in such a relaxed, laissez-faire manner that you might mistake them for an episode of a particularly melodramatic reality show. Among this pantheon of half-baked schemes and eternal shenanigans sits Persephone, the original influencer, long before TikTok or Instagram could promote pomegranate juice. Her tale is one that springs forth from the very earth itself, with a kind of irony that only the ancient Greeks could cultivate with such zest. Our story wafts into view on a sunlit meadow where Persephone, daughter of Demeter, is frolicking alongside her companions. As the goddess of agriculture, Demeter certainly had the choice of any number of exotic hobbies for her daughter, but Persephone preferred the pastoral simplicity of flower picking. One might wonder, as historians do, just how many daisies one must pluck to keep entertained in the pre-Netflix era. The mood shifts as the underworld's resident bad boy, Hades, plots his unwelcome debut. Picture him lurking inconspicuously as one can when riding a chariot made of skeletal horses, waiting for the right moment to gallantly abduct Persephone. Whether this was an attempt at flirtation or an ill-planned wish to update his relationship status from eternally alone to it's complicated, the facts remain delightfully obscure. At this point, you can almost hear the gentle sigh of exasperation from the other gods as Hades carries Persephone away, leaving behind a flurry of daffodils and utterly baffled woodland creatures. Meanwhile, atop Mount Olympus, Zeus surveys the growing chaos with a bemused serenity, probably thinking of ways to mediate that involve the least amount of labor. After all, when you're king of the gods, delegation is the key, preferably when dealing with familial squabbles. In the aftermath, Demeter, goddess and now disconsolate mother, went on a global quest with an intensity only a mother searching for a missing child could muster. Her anxiety took a slightly alarming turn as Demeter's sorrow became a tad too literal, causing droughts, famines, and an increasingly wilted world scene. It's almost as though the world itself was trying to coax her back to a state of agricultural wealth, or, at the very least, to convince her to hire a deputy. Eventually, with all the subtlety of a god unplugging a television set, Zeus intervened. While it took a bit more than a simple arm twist, or mayhaps the looming threat of a very parched planet, to motivate him into playing peacekeeper, he eventually brokered a compromise. The solution was delightfully diplomatic. Persephone would split her time between the underworld and the earth. As it was decided during a passionate debate that one cannot simply return from the underworld without acknowledging one's host's hospitality, Persephone would spend a portion of the year with Hades and the remaining with her joyous, soil-enriching mother. This arrangement gives birth to the seasons, a rather nifty explanation when you think about how winter's chill aligns with Persephone's underworld visits, while spring's verdant bloom announces her return. As the final act draws to a close, imagine Demeter's cheerful return to form, coaxing the flowers back to bloom while perhaps dropping a hint to Persephone about her generous restriction on future chariot rides with underworld-bound gentlemen. Persephone, now a woman of dual domains, had inadvertently invented the long-distance relationship, a timeless concept proving that even in Olympus, absence can indeed make the heart grow fonder. With our mythological musings settling into the cozy embrace of daydreams, we prepare to turn the page. For tucked quietly beneath the celestial constellations, a new story waits, ready to breathe life into yet another ancient secret from these tales as old as time themselves. In a land where the past seems closer than the present and sandals are never out of style, we find ourselves pondering the mythological marvel known as the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice. I promise, it's a love story more timeless than a Greek vase, though admittedly not much more durable. Orpheus was a young man gifted with a voice so enchanting, the very hillsides would swoon, and sheep in all their woolly numbers would gather for nightly concerts. Alas, it wasn't the ovine audience that captivated his heart. No, it was the beauty known as Eurydice. Her name flowed as sweetly as honeyed nectar, and she was as radiant as a picnic under the Greek sun, minus the ant invasion. Orpheus and Eurydice's love blossomed more fervently than an Athenian economy during a festival. Their wedding took place with more pomp than a peacock convention. But as you might guess, there's a twist, and not the kind involving a celebratory Greek dance. Down came the curtain on their matrimonial bliss faster than you could say, tragically mortal. Eurydice encountered disaster in the form of a deadly serpent. Unfortunately, it was not the kind of snake charming one might see at a village fair, but rather a biting critique in the form of a poisonous fang. And so, our beloved Eurydice found herself in the underworld faster than an ancient gossip could spread tales of it. Heartbroken and likely suffering from a severe case of selective overconfidence, Orpheus ventured into the underworld. And let's pause to appreciate that in Greece, going underground meant more than avoiding Zeus's latest storm tantrum. It entailed a journey to Hades, the realm of not-so-eternal summer, where shadows linger and everyone owns cold weather gear. Orpheus, with his trusty lyre and unwavering courage, serenaded his way through realms of the undead. Even Cerberus, the three-headed guard dog of Hades, got a free concert onto its metaphorical music playlist, 3 times over, naturally. Orpheus's soulful melodies softened the heart of Hades himself, convincing him to allow Eurydice a return ticket to the living world. There was only one catch. Orpheus mustn't look back until reaching the surface. Now, one might think this part would be as easy as enjoying ambrosia-infused jam on a slice of ambrosia toast. However, it turns out that Orpheus had the resolve of a distracted raccoon at a shiny object convention. As they ascended towards life, doubt tingled his fingertips, curiosity prodded his mind, and like a demigod's tragic flaw waiting to happen, he glanced back. Imagine, if you will, a moment heavier than a philosophical debate on existence. Eurydice's form dissipated like early morning mist, leaving Orpheus to ponder regrets more aching than his lyre's strings had ever wailed. Yet, don't feel too pained, dear listener. Eurydice, perhaps, sighed one last longing sigh, knowing she had been loved beyond legend. The grief-stricken Orpheus roamed the earth, unable to pen such sorrow into verse, and eventually his own life took a somber finale. The Muses, noted for their soft spot towards artistic souls, spirited him away, so he could finally join his beloved on the eternal stage. And thus, as our tale drifts into a gentler realm, where even the boldest myths fade into whispers under a blanket of starlit skies, our minds too begin to unweave from the day's tight strands. We float down the river of stories, serenaded by songs not of Orpheus, but of dreams welcoming us with open arms. As chapter mingles silently into memory, we turn to another page where history's soft chuckles wait, a world where the laughter of gods can lull you deeper into tranquil repose. As the stars twinkled over Mount Olympus, a new episode was unfolding in the ever-entertaining soap opera that was the Greek pantheon. Tonight's star, Hermes, the original multitasker of the ancient world, whose primary job seemed to involve flitting around like a hyperactive hummingbird, delivering messages and causing mild mayhem wherever he went. Hermes, the god of travelers and shepherds, was born with restless feet and a penchant for mischief that could put a pack of bored toddlers to shame. As a newborn, he fancied himself a bit of a musician, strumming on a turtle shell and inventing the lyre, a welcome break from your standard baby activities like teething and screeching. However, his aptitude for crafting instruments was matched only by his alert opportunism and a suspicious lack of scruples, as demonstrated one mischievous evening in Thessaly. Young Hermes, still in his baby toga, decided it was time to engage in some sibling rivalry with none other than Apollo, the golden god of music, poetry, and an enigmatic fondness for cows. Yes, dear listener, with a slide more mischievous than even the wiliest fox, Hermes embarked on an impromptu bovine relocation project. Under the cover of night and a veil of baby innocence, he made off with Apollo's sacred herd. Imagine Apollo's surprise when he strolled up to the pasture the following morning, expecting the soft moo of his divine cattle, only to be greeted by an empty field and a note, probably signed with a suspicious baby footprint. Apollo was not amused, but rather than smite, he set out to find Hermes, who was likely chuckling somewhere behind an olive tree, thrilled with his Houdini-like escapade. On finding Hermes, Apollo's fury melted like Icarus's wax wings in the noonday sun. Where Hermes sparkled in spirited denial, Apollo faced an undeniable charm offensive. Hermes played his new lyre, weaving melodies that softly detangled the god's anger. Apollo, enchanted by this magical music that seemed to carry whispers of pastoral dreams and languid days, was moved. A deal was struck. Hermes would return the cows, and in exchange, Apollo would get the lyre, thereby adding musical instrument exchange to the list of peculiar trades in mythology. Thus, peace was restored on Olympus, at least until Hermes' restless spirit concocted the next scheme. In time, he became the psychopomp. No, not a new soda pop, but rather a guide for souls to the underworld. It seemed the gods were prone to giving one another lofty titles as a compensation for mischievous tendencies. Tired of celestial routine, Hermes graciously accepted this job transfer, proving once again that even deities get bored of their day jobs now and then. His work took him all across the ancient world, from Elysian fields to Hades' underbelly, a job description that might give some goosebumps, but gave Hermes the pleasure of talking to interesting folks, like heroes, poets, and possibly that one guy who invented tzatziki sauce. As Hermes fluttered from the land of the living to the realm of spirits, music persisted as his true companion, an eternal melody that whispered through history like a breeze on a sleepy afternoon. His flighty footsteps left prints in the sands of time, echoing the playful pace of a world steeped in wonder and whimsy. And so, our tale dances lightly to a gentle close, with Hermes flitting off into mythological memory, leaving behind an enduring legacy of laughter, lyres, and livestock. The night sky over Olympus seems just a little brighter, with mischievous footsteps etched among the stars, a celestial reminder that sometimes the smallest gods leave the biggest footprints. Now drift along this gentle tune, where even the gods find respite in dreams, and let the stories of Olympus carry you softly into your own serene escape, where dreams and myths intermingle in the starlit tapestry of sleep. Sleep well, dear listener, as the next whispers are just on the horizon, waiting to carry you further into the mystic symphony of the past. As dawn begins its drowsy ascent on our literary journey through the Greek myths, we find ourselves gently enshrouded in the tale of Orpheus and his legendary lyre, a stringed instrument that, believe it or not, was a bit like the ancient world's prototype of Spotify. Orpheus, the rock star of his age, if by rock you mean lyre, had the enchanting ability to serenade trees, stones, and occasional cows into rapt attention, a useful skill when your audience tends to graze. Mid-performance. But today, we're not just going to discuss Orpheus's musical talents or his peculiar fascination with pleasing inanimate objects. Let's dive into his most famous escapade, which makes every tragic love song sound like a happy nursery rhyme, his journey into the underworld in a determined attempt to retrieve his beloved Eurydice. Ah, love. It really does compel one to embark on the most extraordinary metaphysical commute. Eurydice, a wood nymph with a penchant for dancing around dappled glades, had one of the most inopportune encounters one can have in Greek mythology, akin to tripping over your own feet, but tragically, also highly venomous. As she pranced her way through a bucolic meadow, Eurydice stumbled across a snake, which, in a rather unpoetic move, did what snakes do best. And just like that, the young nymph found herself whisked away to the underworld, much to Orpheus's dismay. Undeterred, our sorrowful singer ventured bravely into Hades, donning a cloak of melodious desperation. Now, the underworld isn't known for its hospitality, but Orpheus's reputation clearly preceded him. As he strummed his lyre and sang with haunting beauty, the powers of the ethereal realm, from harried shades to skeptical Cerberus, found their stony hearts nudged open a crack. It seems, perhaps, that even the dead enjoy some good acoustics. Hades, being the formidable yet surprisingly impressed king of the underworld, agreed to a conditional release of Eurydice. There was, of course, a catch, a condition so quintessentially Greek that it awarded even the hardiest hero a migraine. Orpheus could lead Eurydice out of the underworld, but he mustn't look back at her until they both reached the terrestrial world. One imagines this was less of a trial and more of a test of their mutual trust and, perhaps inadvertently, Orpheus's peripheral vision. And so they began their checkout process from the land of the deceased. But alas, just as they neared the brightening exit, Orpheus, overcome by the all-too-human trifecta of curiosity, love, and sheer impatience, cast a glance backwards. It was a definitive U-turn that promptly sent Eurydice spiraling back to the depths, likely thinking, well, that's awkward. Orpheus, now melancholy incarnate, returned to the living realm alone, his song now echoing with the profound loss that even the most stoic philosophers would struggle to articulate. In a testament to his emotional bandwidth, Orpheus swore off human contact, except maybe the odd chat with passing birds who found him relatable. There's a comfort in knowing that while Orpheus lamented his fate, the ancient Greeks were decisively thinking, next time, don't turn around, mate. The story of Orpheus and Eurydice is a symphony of missteps, literally and metaphorically, that reminds us of the capricious nature of fate and love. A tale as old as Zeus's own toga, it gently serenades us into contemplative slumber with its melodies of loss, longing, and lessons in the art of not peaking until you're told. As the twilight of chapter 16 fades, we hold on to Orpheus's echoing notes, carrying them with sleepy grace into the upcoming adventure, like a lullaby guiding us to the next dream. As night gently drapes its velvety cloak, let's lazily drift into the mellow world of the Greek gods, those timeless personalities whose epic tales echo like whispers through the winds of time. Picture, if you will, the grand Mount Olympus, the supreme address in ancient Greece's elite neighborhood, where matrimonial squabbles were cosmic events and sibling rivalries set the foundation for many a soap opera. Now, in this snug little nook of Mythland, we stumble upon an unsuspecting hero often overshadowed by his buff, lightning bolt-wielding brother, Zeus. Meet Hades, the underappreciated head honcho of the underworld, whose job was to oversee the dead, a role not nearly as glamorous as throwing thunderbolts around during breakfast. You may picture Hades as a cheerfully misunderstood goth who threw the best underground parties in history in a literal subterranean venue. Hades was famously married, in a liaison arguably the result of some celestial-grade dating advice gone awry, to Persephone. Together, they managed the only bifurcated real estate deal governed by the cycle of seasons. Persephone was kidnapped by Hades, but allowed to visit her mother Demeter. This back-and-forth journey gave rise to the shifting seasons. Burnt toast notwithstanding, winter truly was coming, courtesy of Demeter's despair at her daughter's absence, while summer heralded Persephone's return. A seasonal custody schedule, indeed. In a particularly compelling subplot, the story of Orpheus and Eurydice plays out like a vintage romantic tearjerker. Orpheus, the maestro of melancholic melodies, played the lyre so beautifully that he could charm stones into dancing. Unfortunately for him, true love was less, easily swayed by his tunes. Eurydice, as the plot twists would have it, succumbed to an untimely demise. Orpheus, demonstrating the tried-and-true method of confronting your problems head-on, trekked down to the nether regions to plead with Hades himself. With a melody velvet enough to make even the Lord of the Underworld sniffle, Orpheus bargained for his love's life, granted her freedom with a caveat. He mustn't look back at her until they fully emerged from the underworld. Alas, Orpheus turned back to ensure she followed, because really, in Greek mythology, no story ends without a side of tragic irony. If ancient Greek choruses could sway their arms, they would wave them disapprovingly here, you see. Meanwhile, on the sunlit sprawl above, the bucolic meadows were occasionally visited by Dionysus, the god of wine, winemaking, and general merriment. Known for turning awkward social gatherings into legendary celebrations, Dionysus transformed the ancient world's wine-wrapped social engagements into epic sagas of their own. His personal philosophy: life's too short to drink bad wine, or maybe he simply insisted on being the life of the party, no matter where the venue might be, whether atop Olympus or within the hollow earth. All of these threads were woven into the mythical tapestry of Hades' realm, an exquisite narrative quilt born from the intersection of intrigue, wine, and enchanted underworld charms. The gods and humans, tangled in tales as intricate as a mortal attempting to understand modern Wi-Fi connectivity, left behind lessons cloaked in humor and hewn from history's dazzling chisel. And so, feathered by the lull of ancient awareness, we glide onward, past some underground passages that might have inspired a Mobius strip, through tales where shadows often held enlightening secrets, and onto the dreamy expanse beyond, where each tale blends seamlessly into the next, like the gentle turning of a celestial page, in the dim, rosy glow of ancient Greece's fading twilight. We find ourselves hobnobbing with the whimsically complicated world of Achilles' heel, or, as contemporary podiatrists might grimace, the original footnote. Here in the 18th act of our mythological saga, we encounter the tale of Thetis, part sea nymph, part worrywart mother, and full-time innovator of dubious parenting techniques. Thetis, like any doting Greek mother, wanted only the best for her son, Achilles. However, her version of private schooling involved dunking the newborn Achilles into the infernal, molten, overly interactive waters of the river Styx, a river with all the allure of a hot spring and the optional side effect of invulnerability. A classic case of what could possibly go wrong. Thetis held tightly to Achilles by his heel, ensuring his future heroics, yet simultaneously assigning him history's most infamous Achilles heel. It's the little things, or rather, the little parts of anatomy, that make a big, sing difference. Having been half-baptized in this supernatural spa treatment, Achilles grew up with a literal Achilles complex, if you will. Beyond the battlefield and far away from the socially volatile Olympian gatherings, as it turns out, Zeus, king among gods, was often uninvited because of his penchant for monopolizing ambrosia and delivering overlong discourses on thunderbolt maintenance. Achilles was playing the 12th century BCE version of dodgeball like an undefeated champion. The only complaint from his playmates, he was particularly unfair at heelsies. Achilles' spectacular downfall, of course, was due to a rather brusque introduction to a stray arrow delivered with precision by the protagonist of Bad Timing, Paris of Troy. Notably more interested in archery than in keeping most of Greece on his good side, Paris managed to topple the great hero in what might very well have been history's first known experiment in small-scale ballistics. Marvel at the irony. Here, Achilles, who in battle was as untouchable as an out-of-stock ambrosia wine at Dionysus's post-Bacchanalia garage sale, was brought low not by legions face-to-face, but rather by one unsuspectingly lethargic heel. It is perhaps a gently comic reminder that even in an era where most folks donned chitons and wrestled lions for fun, true strength is measured by our smallest vulnerabilities. Just beyond the river Styx, where sprain and strain checkups run late, Achilles' tale serves as a dreamlike footnote in the annals of mythological heroism. If you listen closely, you might hear the ethereal snickers of the river itself, as its waters whisper tales passed down through the aeons, of heroes, mothers, and heels, all preserved in the poetic fog of Greek mythos. A reminder that mothers know best, except when they hold on just a touch too tightly. Now, as our storytelling winds its way back into the mists of time, let your eyelids grow gently heavy. Ahead stretches a winding path as we follow yet more threads weaving through the rich tapestry of antiquity. But rest for a little while here at these rippling waters, allowing dreams to settle around you like the warm embrace of Mediterranean night. Drift ever calmly, and we shall soon continue with stories soothingly bizarre, full of gods and mortals mingling under the ancient sky. In the realm of Greek mythology, where every tale seems to be competing for the title of most dramatically unbelievable, we find ourselves today with the lovely, albeit slightly unpredictable, adventures of Theseus. The daring hero Sort of a poster boy for heroic deeds and complicated family trees, had a knack for stumbling across stories that made for perfect bedtime material, as long as you're not too concerned about logic or coherent plotlines. Theseus's saga kicks off, as many Greek stories tend to, with some family drama. Imagine watching an ancient Greek soap opera, only with more tunics and less set design. You see, Theseus was the son of Aethra, and, as mythology would have it, had two dads. One mortal, King Aegeus of Athens, and the other divine, Poseidon, the god of sea and shaky internet connections. Given this lineage, Theseus was destined to either conquer monsters or become the most epic lifeguard in history. Living in a time when being the strongest was the national pastime, young Theseus was handed an ancient workout regimen that would make even the most dedicated modern gym-goers blush. For a bit of familial initiation, King Aegeus left a sword and sandals tucked under a boulder, because under the bed storage just wouldn't cut it, and declared that only his true son could retrieve them. Theseus, perhaps with a touch of teenage rebellion and a hero's determination, stepped up to this task. Understandably, he became very popular thereafter, receiving invitations to chaos and high adrenaline challenges across the Greek peninsula. Most notably, Theseus is famed for his enlightening little holiday on the island of Crete, where he volunteered to tackle the Minotaur, a creature so ferocious and misunderstood, it was basically the goth cousin of the mythological world. The Minotaur, with its bull-headed demeanor, lived somewhere that has to rank in the top 10 greatest real estate listings in mythology: a labyrinth. Now, you might ponder why a creature that's half man, half bull, needs a labyrinth. But remember, this is mythology, where logic checks its bags at the door. Enter Ariadne, possibly the most enthusiastic DIYer of the era, who practically begged Theseus to use a cunning, if simple, trick: her golden thread. She spun this ingenious plan without even a Pinterest board in sight, showcasing that sometimes love, bravery, and a really great piece of string can conquer what brute force cannot. With Ariadne's guidance and a twinkle of courage, Theseus really gave the Minotaur's real estate agent something to answer for after heroically slaying the Minotaur, which sounds like an ancient fancy way of saying having a very stern conversation. Theseus and his entourage of rescued tributes boarded his ship back to Athens. But alas, ever the enigmatic soul, Theseus managed to lose Ariadne along the way. Clearly, making sure you don't lose the person who just saved your life wasn't a priority on his to-do list. Or perhaps, in true Greek mythological style, Theseus simply adhered to a narrative where personal resolutions were best left incomplete. When eventually Theseus made it back to Athens, it was with the rather significant detail of black sails still afloat, a somber symbol of defeat that sent his father, King Aegeus, into such despair that he named the Aegean Sea after himself, in a legendary bout of namesake real estate. It's always nice to know your memory is anchored somewhere. As you drift into the arms of sleep, remember the tangled tales and epic threads woven by heroes like Theseus. While his stories might be littered with moments of ancient daring-do, they remind us that sometimes it's the journey more than the destination, or how effective your string is, that truly matters. Yet, with tales of fewer plots and more gods awaiting, let your mind sail gently to the horizon of dreams, as the echoes of this myth tease the whispers of stories yet to unfold. As the sun lazily dipped beyond the idyllic Aegean horizon, casting whispers of gold and indigo across the sky, we turn to Hermes, the fleet-footed messenger of the gods, whose preferences included practical jokes and winged sandals, handy for those aforementioned speedy communications. One might suggest Hermes was the illustrious overachiever of the Olympian bunch, mastering multitasking before inboxes were ever a societal plague. He got his start in divine showbiz as an infant when he intuitively stole Apollo's cattle, cleverly disguising his tracks, then inventing the lyre from a tortoiseshell to appease his irate brother. Little sibling rivalry can't be solved with a good tune after all. Beyond thievery and music, Hermes dabbled in diplomacy, and was entrusted with perhaps the most crucial of mythical duties, escorting souls into the afterlife. It's comforting to imagine our souls in the hands of a comedic trickster with an appreciation for musical innovation. Not quite the Grim Reaper, but rather a ferrying friend on comedic wings. However, the true magic of Hermes lies in his gift for travel, a crucial factor in an age before Google Maps and reliable GPS. Imagine bloating tourist agencies advertising among the ancients, "Get there faster with Hermes Transit. Devotees travel first class." Guided by Hermes, even Odysseus might have opted out of a 10-year commute home, saving Ithaca substantial anguish fees. Speaking of thought-provoking travels, let's dig deeper into the realm of mortal affairs, where the peaceful fields of Arcadia offer steady tranquility, disturbed by the odd pastoral bellow. Arcadians enjoyed pastoral, simpler times under the care of their own local divinities, the rustic gods and goddesses who eschewed the dramatic Olympian commotion for the serenity of nature's rhythm. Apollo often swooped by Arcadia, charmed by his peaceful worshippers and the delightful tunes of panpipes. Incidentally, panpipes were the invention of the god Pan, a quirky satyr known for his woodland charisma and remarkably amateur haircare. His unkempt beard would make a forest look trimmed, and, despite his less than fashionable appearance, Pan mesmerized his surroundings with musical enchantment. If Waxland were a place, Dionysus, the god of wine, revelry, and theatre, would be their mayor. He visited Arcadia frequently, promising a revelrous festival alongside delirious dances. It appears revelry and fermented grapes compose the universal language, easy to understand whether your tongue is Olympian or Arcadian. Wine and Wit, a two-part harmony, might have been the masterpiece he composed, alongside Pan's mellow reeds. But Dionysus, in all his merriment and misrule, didn't settle there. His feasts, akin to an eternal happy hour, spun across the land, strengthening the bond between humanity and the divine through the unlikely medium of one too many goblets of wine. Because who doesn't love a god that encourages both theatre and open bars? Meanwhile, the mortal hero Perseus did not believe in dawdling. Though not quite an Olympian, he'd earned honorary status through his heroics, which notably included skewering Medusa as if she were your average, garden-variety, monstrous serpent lady. Post-Medusan adventures saw him scuttling through dramatic cliff encounters and heartwarming rescues. Talk about an action-packed life. And he claimed no pensions or divine accolades for his troubles. The gods, while delightfully problematic with their erratic whims, nudged mortals towards greatness. Even in Arcadia's rustic corners, tales of valor, heists reimagined as heroism, and art masquerading as music nestled within the melodies of reeds through day or night. All these stories, carried with agile grace by Hermes, imprinted fantastical visions in the dreams of starry-eyed Arcadian dreamers. So, with Hermes sashaying through celestial duties, and Dionysus extending endless invitations to feast and frolic, whether mortal or Olympian, joy found a way across an imaginary Aegean landscape. Like a lullaby wrapped in myths and melodies, the tales lulled Arcadia to sleep as another chapter closed, inviting us to linger further into this ancestral world where history and myth blend seamlessly. As our tale meanders deeper into the long, whispered corridors of Greek mythos, we find ourselves tiptoeing past a less told, but certainly not less intriguing, alleyway. This is the storied path of Daedalus and his now quite vaunted adventures in ancient air travel. Yes, long before budget airlines were selling tickets to dreams of sunny beaches, Daedalus was solving peculiar problems with wax and feathers, proving that even the ancient Greeks weren't immune to unreasonable luggage fees. Picture now the warm eye of the Aegean sun gazing upon a cunning craftsman, Daedalus, whose workshop was filled with half-finished sculptures, over-enthusiastically carved marble, and a suspicious amount of bird feathers. Stationed within the labyrinthine Isle of Crete, he was a man known for both brilliance and, occasionally, for foolishness, as many brilliant folk often are. One might say that the murmur of yet unwritten health and safety regulations barely reached his ears as he went about inventing with a twinkle of mischief in his eyes. But our star-studded sleeplight twinkles mostly on the incident that would forever embed the name Daedalus in the mythological sky chart. When tasked by King Mythos to constrict a labyrinth, the kind so perplexing that even a map would be wantonly disoriented, Daedalus outdid himself. And therein lay the problem. For no sooner had our architect unfurled his crowning achievement than it entrapped him, bearing that sarcastic truth from which even the gods occasionally chuckled. Sometimes, it's the most clever of knots that tie us down the most securely. The plot, however, thickened like an overcooked stoup of ambrosia when Daedalus, not inclined to test his navigational skills within the winding labyrinth for personal leisure, devised a plan. Plucking every feather dropped by Crete's untidy seabirds, he meticulously crafted wings for himself and his son Icarus, who, one might say, was notoriously short on caution, if plentiful in enthusiasm. Perhaps Daedalus should have added an introductory course on inherent risk assessment to the How to Wear Your Wax Wings lesson. As the golden beams of dawn painted the Cretan cliffs, the pair took to the skies, Daedalus, with the cautious flaps of an owl well versed in resume padding, and Icarus, flitting upward in delightful disregard of the solar advice of moderation. Fathers have long given instructions on proper grocery shopping, curfews, and responsible waxwing usage, but as it sometimes goes, sons have a way of glossing over footnotes and parental guidance. Onward soared Icarus, skin tingling with exhilaration, and perhaps a mild heat stroke as he reached nearer the sun than even Apollo. The sun god might have considered wise. Neither a burnt flap nor a sputter in engine history would ever seem as legendary as when Icarus discovered the upper limits of human ingenuity and solar exposure. With an unceremonious plop, Icarus found himself among the gentle arms of the Mediterranean, a little puckered, but no less free-spirited, while Daedalus, who had exercised better sunblock strategies, reflected upon the whole flight fiasco with the sagacity of short-lived eagles. As myth flew its way into tomes, Icarus became a symbol of youthful imprudence, proving once again that while the early bird gets the worm, the early bird with heavier-than-air ambitions might instead require a life vest and swimming lessons. The wings, long since melted back into obscurity, remain a testament to the spirit of human curiosity and its tendency to inspire, yet fall, well, just a tad short of practical application. Daedalus, forever remembered in sculpture and story, lives on as both a handy aviation pioneer and the hapless inventor, nonpareil. And so, as you nestle into the gentle embrace of Morpheus, feel the warm breeze of ancient wisdom over your own feathered dreams. For as the stars sparkle above like so many Icarian ventures, we drift onward into depths untold and stories untangled, nursing our own waxen wings towards new mythical horizons. In the gentle haze of mythological musings, let us drift into yet another curious alcove of Greek legend, where even the divine found time to bicker like children over toys, or rather, over cities. Imagine this. Pastel skies wash over Mount Olympus. Mysterious mists wrap around, its peaks like a toga, and there sits Athena with her hallmark scowl. A master of wisdom she is, the goddess of strategy and crafts, but also quite adept at holding a grudge longer than Zeus's thunderbolts. The story goes that Athens, now a bustling metropolis of tourists and tzatziki, was once an unassuming plot of land in need of a name and a patron. Poseidon, the sea's salty patriarch, glided into view with the suave demeanor of a god who's just lounged too long upon coral throne. His proposal? To gift the city a salty spring by striking his trident into the ground. Alas, potable water it was not, and the chariot of foam he rode in on was soon lost amongst dissatisfied murmurs. Who needs more salt water, right? The world's oceans hadn't quite reached the crisis of sodium saturation like Poseidon seemed to think. Athena, not one to be easily outshone, emerged carrying a mere olive branch, and with a wave as gentle as a lullaby, she planted the city's first olive tree. Suddenly, visions of olive oil drizzled on sun-kissed flatbreads danced enticingly in the mortals' minds. The choice became quite clear. Olive oil over brine any day. Poseidon, left with a city's worth of sour grapes, succumbed to defeat. Athena's triumph was Athens' christening, and somewhere an amphora clinked in her honor, filling only by air, yet weighted by pride. But let us not forget the mortal players in these dramas, whose feet scuttled like pebbles, disturbed by divine hands. Take, for instance, Sisyphus, eternal rock roller, innovator of existential dread. His cunning knotted quite well with his despair. He tried, dear listeners, to outwit death and effectively established forever the cure for time management. However, his story ends in a rather repetitive program of gym class, forever rolling a boulder up and down in the afterlife's most monotonous cardio session. Yet, he teaches us persistence, and perhaps that a little trickery in life might just lead to a workout of mythic proportions. But look closely, dear dreamers, and you'll see part of the comedy lies not just in Sisyphus's punishment, but in the notion that his perpetual labor might be a merciful escape from the chaos of undying gossip atop Olympus. Further afield in this land of echoing song and whispered secrets, hints of our old friend Orpheus drift on the breeze like an earworm seeking freedom. With a lyre as his loyal companion and melodies that could charm rocks, though probably not Wi-Fi routers, Orpheus had a musical inclination that went beyond Spotify's wildest algorithms. Love in his story was both muse and reason for tearful ballad. When Hades showed generosity by letting Orpheus retrieve his lost Eurydice, no one expected the bittersweet crescendo of a backward glance. Such is the folly of musicians. They're good at compositions, but often forget the fine print. Who knew the underworld had such stringent terms and conditions? As we drift further into the night's embrace, it becomes clear that these stories, woven with the colors of jokes and shadows, offer more than just tumultuous drama. They capture our imagination, each tale a pyxis of possibilities where gods squabble, mortals strive, and somewhere, perhaps in the echo of a lyre's pluck or beneath the olive's shade, a nod to the human spirit is made. And now, dear listener, let us pause at this tranquil intermission where history blurs into dreams and whispers chase each other across the pages of time. As our tale winds deeper into the nooks and crannies of Greek mythology, let us gently unravel the intricate threads surrounding the notorious labors of Heracles. Picture our hero, Heracles, occasionally known by his Roman alias, Hercules, drifting through a series of laborious tasks laid upon him by none other than the unfriendly neighborhood king, Eurystheus, who's really just jealous of Heracles' impressive collection of lion cloaks. Imagine, if you will, our mighty Heracles standing before the vast gates of the underworld, preparing for the ultimate rescue mission, retrieving the three-headed hound, Cerberus. Now, Cerberus, often remarked as just a misunderstood pup who really needed is an enjoyable, wholesome game of fetch, was used to an eternity of guarding the gates, barking in three-part harmony to ward off aspiring escapees and intruders alike. However, before Heracles could embark on what many would compare to pet-sitting the world's most terrifying dog, he first had to acquire Hades' approval. And what, may you ask, did the god of the underworld request in exchange for a lending paw? A delightful, leisurely stroll with Heracles through the asphodel meadows, because even the Lord of the Dead craved companionship on his otherwise drearily quiet walks. Upon securing the deal, whether through charm, persistence, or his rather impressive shoulder muscles creating quite the distraction, Heracles proceeded to quite literally tame the beast with his bare hands, becoming perhaps history's first ever acclaimed dog whisperer. But lo, the unexpected guests were flocking to our hero's homecoming again, from Hydra fans to Nemean lion-furred coat lovers. Yes, indeed, Heracles' reputation for taking on the impossible truly had no limits. You see, our friend Eurystheus was none too pleased with Heracles' success, given his penchant for elaborate showmanship over honest heroism. Upon Heracles' triumphant return with the subdued three-headed Phaedo, Eurystheus promptly fled, seeking refuge in one of his large clay pots, which one could say was less kingly fear and more toddler-esque tantrum retreat. In fact, rumor has it that Eurystheus's pot-dwelling became so infamous it inspired the world's earliest recorded game of hide-and-seek, although awarded no mythical status by historians. As dusk softly cloaks our mythological scene, another of Heracles' laborious tasks swiftly swings into view: the fetching of the golden apples of the Hesperides. Now, these weren't just any apples. No Granny Smiths here. These apples were specially grown and gifted by Gaia on the occasion of Zeus's wedding to Hera, making them both divine and slightly awkward to request from any typical garden party. Heracles' pursuit of these lustrous fruits involved not just brute strength, but instead a bit of creative negotiating. Engaging in a candid conversation with Atlas, who, despite his legendary responsibilities holding up the sky, was just having an off day and needed someone to hold things steady for a while, Heracles managed an apple exchange that would become the fantasy of many poor souls stuck in a queue at the grocery store. Of course, this arrangement of carrying the cosmic weight and engaging in philosophical discussions about life and sustenance over apples sparked yet another genre of myths: fitness-centered debates on whether lifting the heavens counted as leg day. But Heracles, always the pragmatic hero, took his apples and returned, leaving Atlas to continue his peculiar balancing act: new apples, potentially in beard. Should you find yourself succumbing to the warm embrace of sleep, let each moment of mythic marvel wrap around you like the finest embroidered cloak, for the tales of Heracles remind us that even in the most convoluted epic, a sprinkle of wit and a steady heart can save the day from spiraling into the mundane. As we float lazily towards the climaxing end of these timeless chronicles, know that one final chapter awaits. Suspended like the brilliant Milky Way, coursing smoothly across a drowsy evening sky, ready to lead us into the peaceful realm of dreams. In the gentle twilight of Mount Olympus, where the clouds float like cotton candy whispered from the mouths of nostalgic children, we find ourselves at the whimsical conclusion of our Greek mythological wanderings. Here, the gods, goddesses, and assorted mythical figures have all meandered into their separate domains, with the faint sound of laughter and the playful thud of ambrosia-fueled revelry lingering on the mountain's peak. Perched on a particularly fluffy cloud, Zeus himself sits with a smirk, recounting tales of thunderbolts hurled with imprecise abandon. His toga is slightly askew, a toga-tastic fashion faux pas by mortal standards, but just another Tuesday in the life of this caffeine-abstinent deity. Nearby, Hermes juggles winged sandals while whispering far-fetched conspiracies about the recent shortage of ambrosia jelly timepieces, which naturally no one actually wears. While the gods carry on their celestial shenanigans, humanity below continues its mundane pursuit, blissfully unaware of the divine drama unfolding above. The ancient Greeks, with their robust supply of olive oil and wine, would undoubtedly have been amused to know that their daily offerings sometimes arrived with a side order of divine eye rolls. Now, if we drift ever so gently from Mount Olympus down to the shores of the Aegean Sea, we'll find another story bobbing lazily on the waves. Here, the legendary ship Argo is forever docked, its golden fleece hung like yesterday's laundry. A salty breeze whispers through its decks as ghostly echoes of Jason and his Argonauts debate whether or not they're, in fact, just an early iteration of a maritime boy band, complete with their own catchy hymn and altocumulus mystique. Into these waters slides the mighty Poseidon, whose moods are as mercurial as any seafaring gentleman. Ever the quintessential seahorse whisperer, he delights in the ebb and flow of oceanic shenanigans, whether it be pretending to lose tridents in particularly robust kelp forests or organizing impromptu regattas with dolphin admirals. It's safe to say that Poseidon has mastered the fine art of watery whimsy. Elsewhere in the cosmos, the stars themselves are hung with the stories of old, shimmering against the night sky in a celestial farce as the mischievous twinkle of Cassiopeia questions why anyone would install such uncomfortable chairs in the Milky Way lounge. Her struggle, you see, is not just mythical. It's cosmic office furniture at its most epic. Then there's the tale of poor Icarus, which reminds us all not to fry our wings with hubris. But hey, hindsight is 20/20 when you're plummeting into the sea. His father, Daedalus, still sells his wax wings kit out of a cozy seaside shack to any tourists foolish enough to think they can outsmart gravity. Closer still, we find ourselves in bustling Athens, where philosophers roam and the scent of olive bread wafts a gentle welcome. Here, Socrates has just completed yet another lecture, only to solemnly conclude, "I cannot teach anybody anything. I can only make them think." About lunch. It appears that even in our mythological meanderings, a good gyro is never far from the soul-searching heart of historical discourse. And as we gently close the cover on these tales, we remember Pandora with her notorious box, who became the accidental patron saint of DIY crafters everywhere, cautioning them against leaving their projects unfinished. For in every heart, even those stowed in the shadows of myths, lies a sliver of curiosity and hope that perhaps the best stories are yet to be crafted. As the whispered stories fold delicately in the tender embrace of the night, the stars, having heard every yarn, stitch together a tapestry of dreams. Our thoughts, like mythological chariots, circle gently before finding quiet repose, each fantastical story offering a blanket of comfort. So now, dear dreamer, as you rest upon the pillow clouds of your own Olympus, let these tales slow the march of time and invite sleep's gentle caress. Drift now, softly wrapped in the myths of old, into the quiet realms where history becomes a lullaby. Sweet dreams beckon, and tomorrow, perchance another story. But for now, we wish you a peaceful night's repose.